The Humanitarian Summit begins in Colombia with the presence of President-elect Gustavo Petro. 120 social organizations will present the agenda for the humanization of the armed conflict. At least 15 people have been killed on the second day of anti-United Nations protests in the Democratic Republic of the Congo's northeastern region. And in Iraq, demonstrators took over the country's parliament in protest against the appointment of a new prime minister. Hello, welcome to From the South. I'm Luis Alberto Matos from the teleSUR studios in Havana, Cuba. We begin with the news. In Colombia, over 120 social organizations presented peace agenda to the upcoming government of Gustavo Petro. From the Artisan Square in Bogota, social organizations from all over the country gathered to deliver to the incoming government of President-elect Gustavo Petro a humanitarian agenda. This consists of a proposal for the humanization of the armed conflict in Colombia and is also an input to the objective that the incoming government is pursuing for total peace. The next president was unable to attend the meeting due to medical recommendations. Among the main proposals put forward by the organizations is that Petro's government fully implements the peace agreement with the extinct FARC-EP, resumes talks with the ELN, and that other armed actors, especially paramilitary groups such as the Gulf Clan, are brought to justice. Parents of the 43 Mexican students who went missing in 2014 staged yet another demonstration Tuesday in Mexico City. Victim relatives were joined by students from the Ayotzinapa Rural Normal School and by members of other organizations. Since President Andrés Manuel López Obrador came to power, important advances in the investigation have been made, including the setup of a Truth Commission and a Special Prosecutor's Office within the federal government, which in 2020 ordered the capture of military officers for the first time ever. However, victims' relatives demand the clarification of the role of the armed forces in the forced disappearance of their children.
There are elements, there are statements which have been filed that show that they did participate, that they used force, that they used intelligence, that they used the whole apparatus to carry out the forced disappearance of those students.
Honduran President Xiomara Castro and United States Secretary of Homeland Security Alejandro Mayorkas met in Tegucigalpa to seek a solution for the unaccompanied Honduran children who crossed the U.S.-Mexico border. The visit came as a growing number of Hondurans crossed the border from Mexico and tried to claim asylum in the United States, according to new data from U.S. Customs and Border Protection. Mayorkas also met with Foreign Minister Eduardo Enrique Reina, Minister of Security Ramon Savillon, and security and law enforcement officials to address ongoing migration challenges in the region. In addition, Mayorkas talked with United Nations agencies that provide support to asylum seekers and vulnerable populations, including children. The meetings came after commitments made at the Summit of the Americas held in California last month.
There are 3,772 Honduran children at the U.S. border. It is an important challenge. There are more than 50,000 Hondurans who are registered for temporary protected status. How we form a joint action with the United States and the President to address this dramatic issue of the more than 3,000 children who are living on the U.S. border. We also address the issue of temporary protected status, and the President reiterated our request to extend TPS and to maintain a special scheme for those who were already benefited from it.
This past Tuesday, hundreds of Uruguayans in Montevideo commemorate the 69th anniversary of the assault on the Moncada garrison, which taken as the political event that kicked off the revolutionary process in the Republic of Cuba. Trade unionists, legislators, political and cultural personalities gathered at Cita Rosa Hall to recall the event and express their solidarity with Cuba, its revolution, and its people. At the meeting, they demanded once again the end of the economic and financial blockade on Cuba. Cuban ambassador to Uruguay, Solán Popa, and the president of the Central de Trabajadores PIT-CNT, Marcelo Abdala, spoke at the event.
Let us not forget about our history, our roots, all the struggles of the peoples. We have to take courage and fight for the rights that we already had, but which are being taken away from us.
We are children of the Cuban Revolution, something that moved the whole continent and the world. So we observe every July 25th to vindicate the revolution and embrace the Cuban people. and shout together for an end of the blockade.
Argentina's economy minister Silvina Batakis expressed her confidence in the extended facilities agreement reached with the International Monetary Fund following a meeting with IMF Director Kristalina Georgieva. We did not directly address the issue of the goals, but we talked about the way in which we are going to meet these goals, said Minister Batakis at a press conference in the Argentinian embassy in Washington. Meanwhile, on Tuesday, the Argentinian Economy Ministry announced financial and exchange incentives for producers and grain collectors to liquidate this year's soybean harvest. The measure seeks to favor the sale of private grain reserves, which are estimated to exceed $18 billion. We'll take a short break now. Join us again after this. Welcome back from the South. At least 15 people have been killed on the second day of anti-United Nations protests in the Democratic Republic of the Congo's northeastern region. The protests were prompted by complaints that the United Nations Organization Stabilization Mission in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, known as MONUSCO, has failed to protect civilians against militia violence, which has raged for years. Demonstrators took to the streets of North Kivu provinces and main city Goma and spread further north to the towns of Beni and Butembo. According to government spokesman Patrick Muyaya, 5 people were killed in Goma and about 50 others were wounded, while 7 civilians were killed in Butembo. French President Emmanuel Macron met with his Beninese counterpart Patrice Talon in Cotonou on the second day of his African tour. After the initial meeting, both heads of state continued with a visit to an exhibition on Beninese art through the ages, a highly symbolic exhibition after the restitution of bronzes to Benin dating from the 16th to 18th centuries that were stolen by various colonial powers. Emmanuel Macron will end his first African tour since his re-election in Guinea-Bissau. Hundreds of people have begun receiving the monkeypox vaccine in Barcelona, Spain. The vaccination campaign in Catalonia began last week with a limited number of vaccines. Doctors say they are targeting first at-risk groups such as gay men and transgender women, since the majority of cases have been registered among such patients. Last week, the head of the World Health Organization said the expanded monkeypox outbreak in more than 70 countries was an extraordinary situation that qualifies as a global emergency. It is WHO's highest level of alert, but the designation does not necessarily mean a disease is particularly transmissible or lethal.
I came for a checkup on Friday, and not long afterwards they contacted me to ask if I was interested in getting vaccinated today, and I said obviously yes, because this way I feel reassured. It is a way to stop the spread. We are a group of risk. In the same way that I got vaccinated against COVID. Well, if I got the COVID vaccine, that is a vaccine done in 2 days, I have no doubts about getting this one, which had existed since much longer.
The German federal government has approved the sale of more than 100 modern self-propelled howitzers to Ukraine. According to local media, the budget for the production will be at 1.7 billion euros. The German manufacturer plans to start production immediately, but it is not yet clear when the first howitzers will arrive in Ukraine. A modern self-propelled howitzer can shoot at 30 to 40 kilometers depending on the ammunition used. It is considered one of the most advanced howitzers in the world and can fire up to 10 rounds per minute. Also in Germany, the strike of ground staff of the Lufthansa's airline group affected some 130,000 passengers whose flights were cancelled at the Frankfurt and Munich airports. According to company officials, some 1,100 flights have been cancelled, almost all of the airline's scheduled flights at these 2 major airports. The influx of passengers to their terminals was minimal, as the company had previously warned those affected of the cancellation of their flights. The strike was called on by the service sector union Verdi, which unites some 20,000 employees. They are demanding a 9.5% wage increase or an increase of at least 350 euros per month. A new Tunisian constitution has been approved by 96.4% of participants in a referendum, the head of the electoral board said, citing preliminary results. According to Farouk Bousker, chief of the electoral commission, just over 2.6 million out of the country's 9.3 million voters backed the new draft. The new charter will enshrine sweeping powers in the office of President Kais Saied. The voting developed amid his opponents saying the move aims to install an autocracy, but his supporters reaffirmed they were necessary after years of corruption and political turmoil. Tunisia's National Salvation Front opposition alliance accused the electoral board of falsifying turnout figures. The new constitution allows President Said to appoint a government without parliamentary approval.
The Independent High Authority for Elections declared the acceptance of the text of the new draft constitution for the Tunisian Republic, put to referendum according to Article 117 of the Fundamental Law.
And we have more news coming up after a final short break, so don't go away. Welcome back to From the South. Hundreds of angry protesters, most of them followers of the Iraqi Shia leader Muqtada al-Sadr, have stormed the parliament building in Baghdad to protest against the nomination for Prime Minister by Iran-backed parties. No lawmakers were present in parliament when the protesters got into the capital's high-security green zone, home to government buildings and diplomatic missions. The protesters opposed the candidacy of Mohammed Shia al-Sudani, who was formally nominated to lead the country on Monday by the Coordination Framework, the largest Shiite alliance in the Iraqi parliament. His nomination followed the mass resignation of al-Sadr's parliamentary bloc, a group of over 70 lawmakers who withdrew from the government body last month in an apparent show of force after months of political stalemate. The Chinese government has warned of serious consequences if United States House of Representatives Speaker Nancy Pelosi were to proceed with her visit to Taiwan. In a news conference, Foreign Ministry spokesperson Xiao Lijian urged the U.S. to respect their promise of not supporting Taiwan's independence and warned that Pelosi's trip, if it were to happen, will further increase tensions between Washington and Beijing. In the meantime, the spokesperson for the Ministry of National Defense, Colonel Tan Kefi, said if the U.S. side insists on going ahead, the Chinese military will never sit idle and will take strong measures to fight back any external interference and separatist attempts for Taiwan's independence. The United States House of Representatives Speaker Nancy Pelosi's initiative to travel to Taiwan has raised tensions on the U.S. political scene. While the politician's plan is encouraged by her Republican peers, President Joe Biden seems to favor a greater dialogue with Beijing. So far, the White House and the President's office have not challenged Pelosi's initiative, though they have not publicly opposed to it either. Cutting China's growing influence has been on the top of the foreign policy agenda of Biden's administration, yet the U.S. head of state has sought to prevent tensions from escalating unnecessarily. All this occurred as the White House prepares for another call between Biden and his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping, a conversation the U.S. President said is expected this week despite his COVID-19 diagnosis. North Korea has warned that the United States and South Korea will face unprecedented security challenges if they don't stop their hostile military pressure campaign against the North, including joint military drills. The latest warning came as Washington and Seoul prepare to expand their upcoming summertime training following the North run of missiles tests this year. According to Cho Jin, Deputy Director General of the Institute of Disarmament and Peace, said that Washington and Seoul's joint military drills this year are driving the Korean peninsula to the brink of war. He accused U.S. and South Korean officials of plotting to discuss the deployment of U.S. nuclear strategic assets during another joint drill set to begin next month. The United Nations Command hosted the 69th Armistice Agreement commemoration ceremony on Wednesday at the War Memorial of Korea. On July 27, 1953, a delegation from the United States, UN Command, North Korea, and China met at the border at Panmunjom, where they signed an agreement to end open hostilities and create a buffer zone between North and South. The Korean War began on June 25, 1950, when North Korean forces crossed the 38th parallel into South Korea. 2 days later, the UN Security Council, in a resolution, recommended urgent military measures and called for a coalition of nations to repel the invasion. The United States was designated to lead the UN Command, which at that time was composed of 22 nations. At least 4 people have died and 16 others were injured after a powerful 7.1 magnitude earthquake struck the Philippines. Interior Secretary Benjamin Abalos Jr. said in a government news conference that the quake struck in northern Luzon, the country's most populous island. Its epicenter was about 13 kilometers southeast of the small town of Dolores, Abra province, with a depth of 10 kilometers. Abalos also stated that 58 landslides have been reported and more than 200 towns in 15 provinces were affected by the earthquake. The earthquake's impact was felt in the capital city, Manila, more than 400 kilometers away, where workers and residents evacuated from buildings and gathered on the streets. Local authorities and several rescue workers continue evaluating the damages caused by the quake and searching for survivors under the debris. The Philippine Institute of Volcanology and Seismology said citizens should brace for any aftershocks, but added it had not issued any tsunami warnings because it was detected inland. The earthquake struck the northern part of the country at 8:43 a.m. local time. The quake caused damages to many households and establishments and activated preventive measures in many places. Citizens are used to rapid evacuations as earthquakes are a frequent phenomenon in the Philippines. The Asian country sits on the so-called Pacific Ring of Fire, a region around much of the rim of the Pacific Ocean where 90% of the world's volcanic eruptions and earthquakes occur. In France, a huge forest fire which broke out about 20 kilometers from Montpellier has already devastated at least 650 hectares of forest. Authorities say that 500 firefighters and 2 Canadair aircraft have been deployed. The Herlot government delegation reported that 180 people have been evacuated, although they underscored that so far there are no casualties. 2 local roads have been cut off by the flames, while the fire is still active in wildland areas in the small towns of Saint-Bruxelles-de-la-Sylve and Guignan. Persistent droughts in much of France and heat waves have led to an increase in forest fires this summer, especially in the southwest of the country, in the department of Gironde.
We could see on the hill that the fire was advancing. Then we went home because the air was starting to be a bit stuffy and our eyes were itchy. And around 5 p.m. the police came knocking hard on our doors, asking us to evacuate immediately, telling us that everything was burning.
And like this, we have come to the end of this news briefing. You can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. You can also join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Telegram. For teleSUR English, I'm Luis Alberto Matos. Thank you for watching.